So the BIS is basically, I would say, Mr. Rothschild's brainchild. Of course, I don't have proof of that. And why do I say that? Well, because one of the Rothschilds said in the 19th century, give me control of the money and I care not who writes the laws, right? So the BIS is the instrument of that. Tuesday, May 7th, 2024, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Yes, we can get caught up in politics, division, wars, famines, plagues, geopolitics. But at the end of the day, it is my opinion that we need to expose the people in charge of the money, of the financial system. Because if we can do that, we can bring their system down, because we are billions, they're only a few thousands. And if we know how they trick us through their financial system and people become more and more aware, we have a much better chance of being on a planet where there's peace, prosperity, and respect for the individual. And it's with that in mind today that I'm going to look at the BIS, or the Bank for International Settlements. Yesterday, the managing director of this bank said, sometimes we need giant leaps to deliver a fundamental rethink of the financial system and foster the development of entirely new architectures. That's Agustin Carstens. He used to be the head of the Mexican Central Bank. Believe me, the BIS and Mr. Carstens, they're not your friends, and that's why we need to expose them, and we need to know who our enemies are. And with that, I'm going to quote Sun Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, and this is what he said. Know the enemy and know yourself. In 100 battles, you will never be in peril when you're ignorant of the enemy, but know yourself. Your chances of winning or losing are equal. If ignorant both of your enemy and yourself, you are certain in every battle to be in peril. That's why I think it's so important to know who the real enemy is. It's not the left side of the aisle or the right side of the aisle. It's not a certain nationality or ethnicity. No, it's the BIS and the people that control this bank. And I'm going to refer to this book, which I highly recommend, Tower of Basel by Adam Libor. I've spoken a lot about the BIS over the years. And if you want to find out more about it, I have a playlist, the BIS, the Central Bankers Secret Club. And I've been talking about it for, 6 years. And I've got about 29 videos in there. But today I'm going to do a refresher here. And before I do, though, I'd like to ask you to share this video, to make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet, and to let your friends, family, colleagues know about these topics, because the more we can get this out there, the better chance we have of stopping them. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the history of the BIS, and you can refer to my other videos if you want to find out more. You might even want to think about buying this book, which I'm going to refer to today. I'm not sure if you can. You probably can buy it on Amazon. So the BIS is a product of World War I and the League of Nations system. League of Nations was the precursor to the UN, which the United States didn't join. The Senate didn't really feel that the United States should be part of an international institution. The League of Nations lasted until 1946. That was the year the UN was created, and For some reason, the United States joined the UN, which I think was a mistake. But be as it may, you've probably heard of all the reparations that were imposed on the Germans at the treaty at Versailles, when they signed the treaty there, especially by the French, pesky French, which many people think led to World War II because they punished the Germans so much for their defeat in World War I. And the Bank for International Settlements was created by an international treaty in The Hague as part of the League of Nations architecture in 1930. And it was supposed to be there to settle these, the monies that Germany owed to the winning side. So you'd think once that was settled that we could close this bank down, but no, it is around still, and it markets itself as this kind of institution that helps regulate the global financial system and banking system. So what kind of institution is it really? Is it a government institution run by governments by treaty? No, believe it or not, it's like a supranational. It's like a country, and worse of all, it's owned by private bankers. Yes, so the Federal Reserve didn't join didn't buy into the BIS in 1930. Mainly because of the fact that the United States was not part of the League of Nations. But you'll be surprised when I go through the statute of the constituent charter of the BIS. You'll be surprised who really owns the BIS. And I said it's supranational. So what it means is the people who are associated or work at the BIS, even though it's in Basel, Switzerland, they are not liable to Swiss laws, except for criminal law, of course. And when the head of the central banks that are part of the BIS travel there every 2 months, they travel on a BIS diplomatic passport. They cannot be stopped at customs, so they're above the law. So let's look at this constituent charter of January 20th, 1930. Whereas the powers signatory to the Hague Agreement of January 1930 have adopted a plan which contemplates the founding of the central banks of Belgium, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, and Japan, and by a financial institution of the United States of America of an international bank to be called the Bank for International Settlements. One thing I would say, all those central banks back in 1930 were privately owned by the major banks. And whereas the said central banks and the banking group, including Messrs. J.P. Morgan and Company of New York, the First National Bank of New York, and the First National Bank of Chicago, and I would say the First National Bank of New York eventually became Citibank. That's what it is today, have undertaken to found the said bank and have guaranteed or arranged for the guarantee of the subscription of its authorized capital amounting to 500 million Swiss francs, and wait for this, equal to 145,161,290.32 grams of fine gold, not Bitcoin, divided into 200,000 shares. And whereas the Swiss federal government has entered into a treaty with the governments of Germany, Belgium, France, Great Britain, Italy, and Japan, whereby the said federal government has agreed to grant the present constituent charter of the Bank for International Settlements and not to repeal, amend, or supplement the said charter, and not to sanction amendments of the statutes of the bank referred to in paragraph 4 of the present charter, except in agreement with the said powers. So I'm going to put a link to this constituent charter in the description. You can read the rest. But suffice it to say, the Federal Reserve now is a member of the BIS. I would venture to say, I'm not sure if JP Morgan and those other banks transferred their ownership to the Fed, but I would say the Fed anyway is owned by JP Morgan, Citibank, and others, so it doesn't really matter. The other thing I would say is that most of the people working at the BIS, they're seconded from the member central banks. And how do I know that? Well, many years ago when we sold one of our houses, one of the viewers was someone that worked for the Bank of England, and he'd come back from Basel, and he was going to settle in England again. And I just asked him off chance, because I'd read this book already, oh, did you work for the Bank for International Settlements? And he said, yes. How did you know? Oh, I said, well, I'm aware of the BIS and what they do. Yes, he said, I was seconded there. So what that means is that his salary and wages are not paid by the BIS, but they're paid by the Bank of England. That's how it works. Augustin Carstens is an exception. He's been picked to be the managing director. So the goal of the BIS, I said the BIS is not your friend, is to basically consolidate power for these big banks like JP Morgan and others, so that one day they can run the world and have you under their control. That's why they want to impose CBDCs. That's why they always create these crises that we've had every 10 years or so they can consolidate their power, so they can bring their solutions to make things better. And that's why I said, this comment by Augustin Carsten yesterday is just more of the same. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to abolish the BIS and to make sure that the banks are not like in bed with governments, that the banks don't have supranational power to be above the law. And through the Financial Stability Board, which is called the FSB, a lot of people don't even know that the FSB is actually part of the BIS. These international bankers, they write the regulations for the banking sector worldwide. Yes, and you'd think that if there was going to be regulations for, let's say, the UK or the United States or France or Germany, banking and financial regulations, it should be set by the legislators in that country, but it's not. So the BIS is basically, I would say, Mr. Rothschild's brainchild. Of course, I don't have proof of that. And why do I say that? Well, because one of the Rothschilds said in the 19th century, give me control of the money and I care not who writes the laws, right? So the BIS is the instrument of that. And that's why we need to expose it. CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies that the BIS pushes, it is just another method of control that we need to really say no to. So you're probably asking, how bad is the past of the BIS? Well, I'll give you a couple of examples, right, from this book, which I highly recommend. And Adam Libor, I haven't seen him around that much on social media or anything. I think I tried to contact him years ago, but never got a reply. But he actually spoke to the people involved in this. He spoke to central bankers about it. So there you go. I'm going to go to page 50. I think, what page is it? 59 here, chapter 5. And it's called An Authorized Plunder. The Bank for International Settlements is the bank which sanctions the most notorious outrage of this generation, the rape of Czechoslovakia. George Strauss, Labour MP, speaking in the House of Commons, May 1939. So it says, when Nazi Germany annexed the Czechoslovak border province of the Sudetenland in September 1938, it immediately absorbed a good part of the country's banking system, as well as most of Czechoslovakia's strategic defenses. By then, the country's national bank had prudently transferred most of its gold abroad to two accounts at the Bank of England, one in the name of the BIS and one in the name of the National Bank of Czechoslovakia itself. Countries had deposited some of their gold reserves in a sub-account at the BIS account in London to ease gold sales and purchases. Of the 94,772 kilograms of gold, only 6,337 kilograms remained in Prague. The security of the national gold was more than a monetary issue. The Czechoslovak reserves, like those of Republican Spain, were an expression of nationhood. Carved out of the remains of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918, the Czechoslovak Republic was a new and fragile nation. A good part of the gold had been donated by the public in the country's early years. Joseph Malik, the governor of the National Bank, and his fellow Czechs believed that, even as the Nazis dismembered their homeland, if the national gold was safe, then something of the country's independence would endure. They were wrong. The Czechoslovaks' faith in the probity of the BIS and the Bank of England was tragically misplaced. The gold was sacrificed with barely a second thought to the needs of transnational finance and the Third Reich. The Nazis' first demand came in February 1939 when Berlin ordered Prague to transfer just over 14.5 metric tons of gold, supposedly to back the German currency now circulating in the Sudetenland. This was certainly an innovative idea. First invade a neighboring country, annex part of it, and then demand that the newly truncated state supply the gold to pay for the loss of its territory. The following month, the question became academic. On March 15th, the Wehrmacht marched into Prague. The German protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia was declared, and Czechoslovakia no longer existed. But the gold reserves did. 3 days later, a Reichsbank official was dispatched to the National Bank of Czechoslovakia and ordered the directors, under the threat of death, to issue two orders. Thanks to diligent detective work by Pete Clements, the BIS archivist, we have a clear picture of what happened next. The first order instructed the BIS to transfer the 23.1 metric tons of Czechoslovak gold held at the BIS account at the Bank of England to the Reichsbank BIS account, also held at the Bank of England. The second order instructed the Bank of England to transfer almost 27 metric tons of gold held in the National Bank of Czechoslovakia's own account to the BIS account at the Bank of England. Malik and his fellow directors hoped that it would be obvious that the instructions had been issued under duress and so would not be implemented. The Nazis had just invaded Czechoslovakia and would obviously target the national gold reserves. But Malik had not reckoned on Montague Norman. Well, he's the governor of the Bank of England. The governor of the Bank of England had no interest in whether Czechoslovakia was free or a Nazi colony. Political considerations must not affect the BIS's transactions. The transfer order, he said, must go through. So there you go. That's how these central bankers think. They don't think of a nation or a country. They think of their profits, and they don't care about you. They care about their profits. So I'm going to skip now to page 125, and this is after World War II, at the end of World War II. And during World War II, you can read in this book as well, but I'm not going to go through it. You have to take my word for it. The Allied countries and the Axis countries, they're still doing business through the BIS. So without the BIS, I would argue that there wouldn't have been a World War II, because Germany wouldn't be able to have financed its war efforts, believe it or not. So page 125. So let's go through this. In Basel, McKittrick. Well, McKittrick was an American banker who was the head of, he was the Augustin Karsten of his day, right? Was enraged by the attacks on the bank. He wrote to the Bank of England and demanded a full investigation into the BIS's wartime record, which he apparently believed would exonerate him. The prospects of that set off alarms from Whitehall, the British government quarter, to Threadneedle Street, where Lord Cato, the new governor of the Bank of England, had taken over from Montague Norman. McKittrick noted a Foreign Office memo had gone native in neutral Switzerland and was, and I quote, thoroughly out of touch with the way people are thinking nowadays. The end of the war did not seem to bring McKittrick any closer to reality. In March 1945, Orvis Schmidt, the U.S. Treasury official who had attended the Bretton Woods Conference, met with McKittrick in Switzerland. Schmidt, like his boss Henry Morgenthau, was not a fan of either McKittrick or the BIS, and McKittrick knew it. It was clear that McKittrick was fully aware of the manner in which he and the BIS are regarded by the Treasury Department, Schmidt wrote. McKittrick tried his best to persuade Schmidt otherwise. If only the Treasury Department understood the real role that he had and the BIS had played, all that would change. The BIS president ardently believed. This seemed unlikely considering what followed. Schmidt continued, the BIS, McKittrick said, had been strictly neutral during the war. The bank was sort of a club for the world's central bankers, a little group of like-minded men who understood and trusted one another. This trust was unimpaired by issues such as national, political, or governmental interests. Rather, it was a kind of celestial understanding. It would continue regardless of the condition of the world, of the constantly changing political relations between their respective countries. Unimpressed by McKittrick's eulogy, Schmidt asked McKittrick why the Germans had allowed him to run the BIS in this manner. What was it in it for them? In response, McKittrick claimed, in order to understand the conduct of the Germans towards the BIS, one must first understand the strength of the confidence and trust that the central bankers had in each other and the strength of determination to play the game squarely. McKittrick then said that the German members of this elite could positively influence the German government's conduct. These financiers, said McKittrick, were not Nazis, but were needed by the Nazis because of their technical skills. The existence of this little group is the keystone in the explanation of Germany's conduct with respect to the BIS, he explained. So this is what happened. and I'll go back to page 123. It says, on July 18th, Ansel Luxford, a member of the U.S. delegation, proposed a new resolution that no country could join the IMF unless it had taken the necessary steps to foster the liquidation of the BIS. John Maynard Keynes, the influential economist who was part of the British delegation, was furious. Keynes, who was also close friend to John Foster Dulles, suffered from angina and became so agitated by the affair that there were rumors he had suffered a heart attack. He demanded that the resolution be withdrawn or he would quit the conference. There could be no linkage between dissolving the BIS and joining the IMF. Keynes wrote to Morgenthau, he was the U.S. Treasury Secretary, or Britain would not participate in either the IMF or the new bank for an indefinite period. Morgenthau backed down. So there you go. John Maynard Keynes was the man that kept the Tower of Basel alive. So that's the kind of institution it is, and that's why we need to expose it. I know this video is going on for a little longer, but be as it may, let's continue. Let's look at where the markets are this morning. It's 8:30 a.m. London time. Gold and silver rallied well yesterday. I think they're still in good shape. I don't see the dollar and all the major fiat currencies gaining any ground versus reality, and that's what gold and silver are. They're real money. Even the BIS knew that when it was founded. Yes, it was capitalized by gold, not paper. But anyway, right now, spot gold is at $23.19, is down about $5. The high's been $23.30, the low $23.17. Silver's at $27.21. It's down 21 cents. High's been 53 and the low's been 19. I think that 50 area is important. That would signify that we're breaking last week's high. We'll have to see what happens later. I won't go through the rest of the markets. They're pretty much unchanged. There's nothing really here to report. The currencies are pretty steady. So yeah, I'm going to end with that, and I'm going to thank you again for your interest in the channel, and I'm also going to wish you a very good day, and talk to you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.